The prairie wind carried the faint cry of a hawk, echoing over the golden fields where the grass swayed like waves under the pale autumn sun. By the edge of the woods, a lone woman walked slowly, her back bent slightly from years of struggle. Her dark hair, braided and tied with a thin leather strap, caught the light as she carried two small children in her arms. Another child, a boy barely past 4, followed behind her with small, tired steps. Their shadows stretched long on the ground as they approached a weathered cabin. Its wooden boards warped and roof half collapsed. Standing in silence like an old ghost waiting to be noticed again, she stopped a few feet from the door and stared. The air was still, heavy with the smell of dry earth and pine. The cabin looked older than any memory she had left. A few crows perched on the roof's broken edge, watching her like sentinels of the past. She felt a shiver run down her spine, not from fear, but from the strange pull of fate. This was where she had decided to stay, the place no one else wanted. The one spot far enough from the noise of the world that she could finally be alone. The woman was Apache by birth and widow by fate. Her husband had been taken by war, one of the many who vanished between the ridges and never came back. The army had moved through their lands. The settlers pushed in. The earth that once belonged to her people had been carved apart and fenced in. She had fled with her children, leaving behind the ashes of her old home and the graves of her kin. For days, she wandered until the forest opened before her. And this abandoned cabin seemed to call her name. It wasn't much, a few cracked windows, a door that barely held on its hinges, and a floor that groaned under every step. But to her, it was shelter. She laid her babies down near the hearth, where a faint scent of old smoke lingered, and the boy placed their single worn blanket on the ground. Beside the doorway, 2 suitcases rested in the dust, one filled with old clothes, the other with memories she couldn't bear to leave behind. As the evening came, the light through the trees turned copper and soft. The woman gathered dried branches, built a small fire inside, and for the first time in weeks, warmth filled the room. The little ones huddled close, their eyes heavy, while she sat near the door and stared out at the darkening horizon. There was something peaceful about the silence. But it was the kind of peace that comes before a storm. The forest had a way of whispering to her. Sometimes, when the wind blew through the pines, she thought she heard voices soft, almost like her husband calling her name from the other side of the ridge. The creek nearby gurgled through the night, and the distant howl of a coyote reminded her she was not entirely alone. But there was something else too, a weight in the air, something that did not belong to the living. On the second night she couldn't sleep. The cabin creaked as if it remembered old pain. Every step she took made the floor moan beneath her feet, and she kept glancing at the door, though she had bolted it shut. The children slept soundly, their soft breaths a comfort against the uneasy dark. But then she heard a faint tapping sound beneath the floorboards. Slow, rhythmic. Too even to be a mouse. Too deliberate to be the wind. She froze, her heart thudding in her chest. At first, she thought she was imagining it. The fire flickered low, casting long shadows that crawled across the walls like restless spirits. She leaned closer to the ground, her ear near the old wood, and listened. There it was again. Tap, tap. Tap like something knocking from below. She grabbed the old knife her husband had given her, a simple blade, its handle worn smooth from years of use, and crouched near the spot where the sound came from. The tapping stopped. She waited. Nothing. Only the distant chirp of crickets and the soft crackle of dying embers. She exhaled, trying to steady herself, then backed away. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps the house was simply settling, the way old wood does when it breathes again after being abandoned. Morning came bright and cool, with mist clinging to the fields. The children played near the stream, and she washed their clothes, humming quietly to chase away the unease. Still, the thought of that sound lingered. When she returned to the cabin, she noticed scratches on the floor near the hearth, thin, straight lines as though someone had dragged something heavy across the boards. She didn't remember seeing them before. As days passed, small things began to happen. The firewood she stacked at night would be scattered by morning. The baby's toy, a small carved horse, kept appearing in places she hadn't left it. Sometimes when she was outside drawing water from the well, She thought she saw movement through the cracks in the cabin walls, a shadow passing inside when no one was there. Her eldest son began to ask questions she couldn't answer. "Ma," he whispered one night, clutching her dress, "who's singing under the house?" The woman's blood turned cold. She hushed him quickly, pretending not to understand. But when the moon rose high in silver and the children slept again, she heard it too, a low, humming sound coming from the floor. It was faint, like a lullaby from another world. Rising and falling in rhythm with her heartbeat, she lit a lantern and knelt on the ground, her trembling hands brushing away dust and straw. The boards felt colder there, as though something beneath them drew the warmth out of the air. She pressed her palm flat and felt it movement, slow and deliberate. Like the stirring of something that should not be awake, she stumbled back, knocking the lantern over, and the flame flared dangerously before dying. For a moment, she sat in darkness, listening to her own breath and the quiet stirrings beneath the wood. Then everything went still again, leaving her with the kind of silence that screams louder than noise. By morning, she told herself she must be losing her mind. Grief and loneliness had done strange things to her before. She tried to ignore it, to focus on her children, to rebuild the garden that once must have thrived there. But every night, the same thing returned: the sounds, the cold, the faint voice that seemed to whisper her name. Once, she woke to find the floor slightly lifted near the center of the room, as though something underneath had pushed upward. Her heart pounded as she stared, afraid to move. Then, just as quickly, it settled back into place. The children stirred in their sleep, and she sat frozen until dawn, stepped through the cracks, and painted the world gold again. The townsfolk had warned her not to come this far. "That land's cursed," one man had said when she passed through the nearest settlement. "No one stays there long. There's something buried in that place that don't rest easy." She hadn't believed him then. But now, every shadow seemed to hold a memory, every sound a warning. On the seventh night, when the wind outside grew wild and the rain came down in sheets, she finally gathered her courage. She would find out what was beneath that floor. The children were asleep, bundled close together. She whispered a silent prayer before lifting the small rug near the hearth. She pried at the loose board, the knife blade slipping between the cracks. The wood groaned as if protesting, then gave way with a soft snap. A rush of cold air rose from the dark space below. She held the lantern high, its weak light trembling in her hand. The hole yawned open like a wound, and something in the depths shifted a faint glimmer, a shape too vague to name. She leaned closer, squinting into the blackness. Then she heard it. A breath, soft, human. Coming from below the cabin floor, her hand froze on the lantern handle, and every muscle in her body went still. For a heartbeat, she thought she might scream. But no sound came, only the low, steady exhale of someone or something that had been waiting for her all along. And then, from the dark, a voice whispered her name. The lantern nearly slipped from her trembling hands. But she caught it just in time. Her pulse thudded so loudly in her ears she could barely hear the wind outside. For a moment, she stayed frozen, kneeling over the open floor, staring into the dark space that now breathed back at her. The air rising from beneath was cold and damp, smelling faintly of soil and something older, like wood that had never seen sunlight. She whispered her husband's name under her breath, as if hoping the dead might protect her from whatever waited below. The whisper came again, softer this time, but unmistakable. Her name, drawn out, as though the mouth that spoke it hadn't done so in years. She felt her stomach tighten. It wasn't the voice of a child or an animal. It was human, low and raspy, as though it came from someone weak but aware. She wanted to run, grab her children, and flee into the storm, yet something rooted her in place. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was that strange pull again, the one that had drawn her to this cabin in the first place. Her eyes caught a glint in the darkness. She leaned closer, holding the lantern forward, and saw a thin chain partly buried in the dirt below. It was too dark to see what it was attached to. The moment the light touched it, the whisper stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than sound. Her breath caught, and she slowly backed away, lowering the loose plank back into place. The floor groaned softly, as though sighing in relief. She sat by the fire the rest of that night, unable to sleep. The children stirred now and then, but she didn't dare move or close her eyes. Every crackle of the flames made her heart jump. She thought of her husband again, remembering how he used to sit by their old fire, carving wooden figures for the children while humming songs of the desert. He had always told her to listen to the land, that it spoke if one was quiet enough. But she had never imagined it would speak like this. When dawn broke, she covered the opening carefully and placed the rug back over it. Her hand shook, but she forced herself to look calm for the children's sake. They were too young to understand what she had heard, though the eldest seemed uneasy. He kept glancing toward the hearth as they ate their morning bread. "Ma," he asked softly, "was somebody talking last night?" She smiled faintly, brushing his hair back. "Just the wind," she said. "Nothing else." But the lie tasted strange in her mouth. As days passed, she tried to pretend nothing had happened. She cleaned the cabin, patched the roof with whatever scraps she could find, and started planting seeds she had brought in a small cloth pouch. The land was good here, rich and dark, fed by the river that ran through the valley. It could feed her children through winter if she stayed. Yet every time she stepped inside the cabin, her eyes were drawn to the same spot on the floor. At night, the noises returned. Sometimes it was the whispering, other times the sound of dragging, as if something moved slowly beneath the planks. She tried to convince herself it was an animal trapped under the cabin. But the words she had heard that first night would not leave her mind. There was intelligence in that voice. Something aware, something waiting. One afternoon, while the children played by the water, she walked to the nearby town to trade for flour and salt. The shopkeeper, an older woman with a sharp face and weary eyes, looked surprised when she heard where the widow was staying. "Out by the old Miller cabin?" the woman asked, lowering her voice. "No one's lived there for years. Thought the place was cursed after the soldiers came through." The widow asked what she meant, but the woman only shook her head. "Some things are better left buried," she muttered, handing over the goods. "You'd do well not to dig around there." The widow walked home slowly, her mind turning over those words. The soldiers... She remembered stories from years ago, rumors of a skirmish in the woods. A small band of men who vanished after hiding treasure or something stolen from the war. Some said gold, others said sacred relics taken from her own people. The thought made her uneasy. If something was buried under that cabin, maybe it wasn't only the past whispering, it was guilt. That night, when she tucked the children into bed, the rain began again. The roof leaked in 2 places, and she set pots beneath the drips. The wind howled through the trees, bending them like reeds, and thunder rolled over the valley. The storm was fierce, but the cabin stood strong. She sat near the hearth, watching the fire die down to coals. When she heard it, again the sound of wood shifting under weight, her heart pounded. She grabbed the knife and waited. The whisper came once more, clearer now. "Help me." The words were faint but unmistakable. They came from beneath the floor. Her breath caught as she stared at the boards, her hand trembling. She could almost feel the vibration through the wood, like someone knocking softly from below. "Who's there?" She whispered no answer. Only the sound of rain hitting the roof, steady and relentless. She moved closer, kneeling again by the hearth, pressing her ear to the floor. "What do you want?" she asked. For a moment, there was silence. Then, faintly, a man's voice, rough and hoarse, said, "Don't leave me here." She recoiled, her back hitting the wall. Her knife clattered to the floor. Every instinct screamed at her to grab her children and run into the storm, but her legs refused to move. She sat frozen, her breath shallow, her eyes fixed on the floorboards as if they might rise again. The storm lasted through the night, and when morning came, the air was heavy with mist. The children slept late, exhausted from the thunder. The widow walked outside, her bare feet sinking into the wet earth. She needed to clear her head. The forest was quiet now, the rain dripping from the branches in slow, soft drops. She followed the path behind the cabin to the small rise where the ground sloped down toward the creek. There in the mud, she noticed something she hadn't seen before, an old trail. Faint but visible, leading toward the back of the cabin. She followed it cautiously. It wound around a few trees and ended at a half-buried wooden trapdoor covered in moss. Her stomach tightened. She knelt and brushed away the dirt, revealing a rusted iron ring. Whatever was beneath had been sealed long ago. She backed away slowly, her breath shaking. The trapdoor wasn't part of the cabin, it was separate, hidden just behind it. And if the voice came from beneath the floor, maybe this was where it led. That night, she couldn't eat. Her thoughts circled endlessly. She had come here seeking peace, yet the land seemed to want something from her. She thought of her ancestors, how they believed the dead lingered when their stories were unfinished. Maybe the voice below was one of them, a lost soul calling out for release. Or maybe it was something darker, something that fed on grief and solitude. The next day, she decided to ask an old tracker who lived near the hills. He had once known her husband and was one of the few who still spoke to her kindly. She walked to his hut with her youngest tied to her back, the other two holding her hands. When she told him where she lived, his face darkened. That place, he said slowly, was built on an old burial ground. The settlers didn't care. They dug into the earth and used it for their own. The spirits there never rested easy. Her chest tightened. "What should I do?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the land remembers. If it calls to you, it means it hasn't forgiven. Don't ignore it, but don't anger it either. Find what it hides, or it will find you." His words haunted her all the way back. When she reached the cabin, the sky had turned red with the setting sun, painting everything in shades of fire and blood. The children played near the door, laughing, unaware of the shadow growing beneath their home. That night, she couldn't resist any longer. When the moon rose and the world fell silent, she took the lantern again and lifted the loose board. The cold air rushed out, stronger this time, almost like a breath. She set the lantern beside the hole and reached down, her fingers brushing against the edge of the chain she had seen before. It was smooth, worn by time. As she pulled it gently, the earth shifted, revealing something buried beneath a small, rusted box, bound with iron. Her pulse quickened as she brushed the dirt away. The whispers returned, soft and urgent, overlapping like voices in prayer. She hesitated only a moment before tugging the box free and lifting it into the light. The chain slipped from her grasp, clattering back into the dark. The voices stopped. She stared at the box, her heart pounding. The metal was cold as ice. Faint markings covered its surface, symbols she recognized from her people's stories. Signs meant to keep the restless dead contained. And then, from inside the box, something moved. Her breath caught as she stared at the box, the flickering lantern light dancing across its rusted edges. She didn't want to believe it had moved, but her eyes couldn't deny what they saw, the faint shift, the soft scrape from inside, as if something alive stirred within. Her first instinct was to drop it and run, but her hands wouldn't obey. It was as though the box itself held her there, its cold metal pulsing faintly beneath her fingers. Like a slow heartbeat, she set it down gently on the floor and stepped back. The fire had nearly burned out, leaving only a weak orange glow. Shadows clung to the corners of the cabin. Every sound felt amplified: the creak of wood, the sigh of wind, the faint snore of her children sleeping. She felt torn between curiosity and terror. That chain she had seen beneath the floor, the whispers, the symbols now glimmering faintly under the lantern light, it all connected somehow. But she couldn't yet see how. Her hands shook as she touched one of the carvings. It was an old Apache protection mark, one she had seen her grandmother draw in the dust during ceremonies to keep spirits from crossing the boundary between the living and the dead. But this one was carved in reverse. Not to protect what was outside, but to keep something inside. Her stomach twisted. Whatever was sealed within this box wasn't meant to be freed. She took a step back, her heart pounding. She thought of burying it again, sealing it where it belonged. But as she bent to lift it, a faint voice rose from inside, pleading, cracked, unmistakably human. "Don't leave me." The lantern flame trembled as if caught in a sudden breath of cold wind. She stumbled back and nearly tripped over the edge of the rug. The sound was so clear, so full of desperation, it sliced through her like a blade. She grabbed her knife again, though she knew it would be useless against something unseen. The whisper came again, softer this time, like the sigh of someone remembering. "Please, help me." All at once she realized the box wasn't locked. The iron latch had corroded, leaving it hanging loosely. She could open it with one motion, but she couldn't make herself move. The air felt heavy, thick with something ancient, something that remembered pain. A sudden knock startled Hurt, wasn't from the box this time, but from the door. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the small cabin. Her blood ran cold. No one ever came this far. The children stirred but didn't wake. She froze where she stood, waiting. The knock came again, slower now. She forced herself to the door, knife in hand, and lifted the latch. The door creaked open, revealing a tall man standing in the moonlight, his coat soaked from rain and his hat pulled low. His eyes, dark and searching, met hers. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice deep but steady. "I didn't mean to scare you. I'm looking for shelter. My horse went lame a few miles back." She hesitated. The cabin wasn't hers to give, and after what she had just seen, the thought of another stranger inside made her skin crawl. But the storm outside was fierce again, and the man looked exhausted. "You can come in for the night," she said finally, stepping aside. He nodded, removing his hat as he entered. His gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on the box near the hearth before he sat by the fire. "I'm grateful," he murmured. "Not many folks would open their door out here." She didn't answer. She added a few sticks to the fire, watching the sparks rise. The man introduced himself as a traveler heading west, though his words carried the clipped tone of someone used to hiding things. His clothes were worn, but not poor, and a faint scar cut across his jaw. After a long silence, he spoke again. "You found this place abandoned, didn't you?" She turned her head slightly. "Yes. Why?" He ran his thumb along his scar, staring into the flames. "This land's got history. Bad history. Folks say a man once lived here who made a deal with the wrong kind of people, tried to hide something he shouldn't have." Her chest tightened. "Hide what?" He glanced toward the box again. "Depends on who you ask. Some say gold. Others say bones. A few think it was something worse, something he dug up that was never his to take." She felt a chill creep up her spine. The old woman in town, the tracker, the whispers, all of it began to twist together like pieces of a story that didn't want to be remembered. She didn't tell the stranger about what she had found, but he seemed to sense it anyway. "Whatever's buried here," he said softly, "ought to stay buried." When she looked back toward the box, it had shifted slightly closer to the fire. She could have sworn she'd left it farther back. The man noticed too. His expression darkened, though he said nothing. As the night deepened, she offered him a corner to rest. He thanked her, lying near the doorway, his hat covering his face. But she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard that faint voice again, whispering beneath the floorboards, blending with the sound of the rain. The box pulsed faintly in the firelight, its surface breathing with each gust of wind. Near dawn, she awoke to find the man gone. The door stood ajar, and muddy footprints led outside. The box still sat by the hearth, but the latch was undone. Her heart lurched. She knelt beside it, but before she could touch it, the eldest child's voice startled her. "Ma, where's the man?" She turned quickly. "He's gone." The boy rubbed his eyes and pointed toward the door. "He was talking last night. I heard him. He said he found it." She froze. "Found what?" The boy hesitated. "He said the debt's not his anymore." Her mouth went dry. She looked back at the box. The lid had shifted open slightly. It's just enough for her to see inside a folded piece of cloth and something dark beneath it, glinting faintly. She didn't dare lift it, but a faint hum seemed to come from within, almost like the echo of a heartbeat. Later that day, she found the man's horse near the stream, but not the man. His tracks disappeared into the woods as though he had been swallowed by the earth. She tried to convince herself he'd left at sunrise, but deep down, she knew something had taken him. That evening, she decided to hide the box outside. She wrapped it in burlap, tied it with rope, and carried it to the trap door behind the cabin. The ground was damp and cold beneath her feet as she pried the door open. A wave of cold air hit her face. She lowered the box in, whispering a prayer her grandmother once taught her to keep the dead at peace. When she closed the trapdoor again, the whispering stopped. For the first time in days, the night felt calm. The children slept soundly, and the fire burned steady. But as the moon rose high and the forest grew still, she felt a soft vibration through the floor again. It was faint, but rhythmic, so someone or something was walking beneath the ground. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. The river water turned murky, the garden soil grew dry despite the rain, and the crows no longer came near the cabin. Even the air smelled different, sweet, almost metallic. One morning, she woke to find handprints on the window pressed from the outside, though there were no footprints in the mud below. She went to the old tracker again, desperate for answers. When she told him about the box, his face turned pale. "You should have never touched it," he whispered. "That's not just a relic. It's a binding. Whatever was trapped inside now knows you. Can it be sent back?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "You can't send back what doesn't belong to this world anymore. You can only bargain with it." "Bargain," she repeated, her voice shaking. He nodded grimly. "The one who opened it must give it something in return, something of equal weight. Until then, it will take what it wants." When she returned home, she found the youngest child crying near the door. His small hands clutched the carved wooden horse, but its eyes, two small beads she'd sewn in, were missing. The boy pointed to the floor. "It took them," he whispered. The voices, her heart ached with dread. She knew now that the box was more than just a curse. It was a hunger. And by disturbing it, she had awakened something that no longer cared about the boundaries between the living and the dead. That night, as she sat alone by the dying fire, she heard a sound outside, slow footsteps circling the cabin. Then, faintly, the man's voice, the one who had disappeared, whispered through the cracks in the wall. "Give it back," he said. The children stirred in their sleep, and she covered their ears, trembling. But the whisper came again, this time from beneath the floor. "Or it will take them instead." The night felt heavier than ever before. Every shadow inside the cabin seemed alive, stretching and twisting with the flicker of the fire. The widow sat still, her back pressed against the wall, clutching the knife that no longer gave her comfort. Her children slept close together, unaware of the chill that crept through the cracks in the wood. Outside, the wind howled, carrying strange cries that echoed between the trees, too human to be animals, too far away to belong to anyone she could help. The voice that had whispered to her before was silent now. The silence itself had weight. She could feel it pressing against her chest, making it hard to breathe. Every sound, the crack of a branch, the sigh of the wind, made her heart jolt. She wanted to believe it was her imagination, that fear was making her see what wasn't there. But deep down, she knew the truth. Something had been awakened. Something that had waited a long time beneath the ground for someone to hear it again. She hadn't told the children what the tracker said about bargaining. How could she? How could a mother tell her children that the thing haunting their home wanted to trade something of equal weight? Something living. Her hands trembled as she stoked the fire, trying to push the cold away. But the warmth wouldn't stay. No matter how bright the flames grew, a chill lingered in the corners of the room. By morning, the sky was gray and heavy, and the forest seemed quieter than usual. No birds sang, and even the wind had stopped moving. She stepped outside, her boots sinking into the damp earth, and saw something that made her stop. Near the trapdoor behind the cabin, the soil was disturbed. Someone or something had dug there in the night. The rope she had used to tie the box was gone, and the wood of the trapdoor was splintered as if pried open from below. Her throat tightened. The whispers hadn't been calling for her anymore. They had already taken what they wanted. She rushed back inside and checked on the children. They were still asleep, but her eldest's hand was clenched tightly around the wooden horse. The boy stirred, his voice groggy. "Ma," he mumbled. "He came back." Her stomach dropped. "Who came back?" "The man," the boy said softly, still half asleep. "He was standing by the window. He said he's cold." "No." She felt her knees weaken. She moved to the window, but there was nothing there, only fog curling along the edges of the forest. Still, a faint mark stained the glass, like the print of a hand pressed against it from the outside. That evening, as dusk settled, she decided she couldn't stay silent anymore. The box, the whispers, the missing man, something connected them all. She told her eldest to watch his siblings and took the lantern outside, her shawl pulled tight against the wind. The trail behind the cabin was faint, but she followed it to the old graveyard at the edge of the woods. She had never been there before. The ground was uneven, the wooden crosses weathered and tilting. Some had no names at all, only carvings worn down by time. As she walked among the graves, she felt the weight of unseen eyes. Her light flickered as the wind picked up, and the air turned sharp with the smell of iron. Near the far end of the clearing, she saw a newer mound of earth, still raw, still unsettled. There was no cross, only a stone resting atop it. And on that stone lay the same chain she had seen beneath the cabin floor. Her lantern wavered as she reached for it, her breath coming shallow. When her fingers brushed the chain, a shock ran through her body. A flash of voices and images crowding her mind, men shouting, gunfire, the roar of horses, the earth opening up beneath them. She saw the man who had come to her cabin younger, digging in the ground, burying something while the sky burned red. She saw him sealing the box, whispering a prayer he didn't understand. Then walking away while something beneath the soil clawed to be freed. When the vision faded, she was trembling, her knees weak. The chain slipped from her hand and landed with a dull thud. From the trees, a shadow moved. She turned sharply, the lantern light trembling across the graves. A figure stood there at the edge of the clearing, half shrouded by mist. The man. His eyes glowed faintly, his face pale, and still marked with the scar she remembered. "You shouldn't have dug it up," he said, his voice hollow, echoing as if carried from far away. Her throat tightened. "What are you?" she whispered. "What I chose to be," he answered, "and what you will be if you don't end this." She stepped back. "End what?" He pointed toward the cabin, his face darkening. "It wants what was promised. You can't hide from it. You can't bury it again. It knows your name now." Before she could speak, the lantern flame went out. She was left in darkness, the forest alive with whispers. By the time she found her way back to the cabin, she was shaking all over. Her children were awake, huddled together by the fire. Her eldest looked at her with wide, terrified eyes. "Ma," he whispered, "the floor's moving." She turned. The boards near the hearth were rising slowly, bending upward as if pushed from below. Dust fell from the cracks, and the air filled with a deep groaning sound that came from the earth itself. She rushed forward, pulling the children back, but before she could reach the door, a loud crack split the air. One of the planks snapped in two, leaving a dark, gaping hole in the floor. From the hole rose a cold wind, carrying the smell of decay. The fire sputtered and went out. In the darkness, something began to move. It wasn't fast, just a slow, dragging motion, like someone crawling up from a grave. She grabbed her children and backed into the corner, shielding them with her body. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. A pale hand appeared first, its fingers long and thin, clutching the edge of the broken plank. Then came the sound, a low moan, full of sorrow and rage. The woman felt her body tremble, her mind screaming for her to run, but she couldn't leave her children. She whispered prayers she hadn't spoken since childhood, hoping someone, somewhere, might listen. The hand disappeared, and for a moment there was silence. Then the voice came again, no longer soft or pleading, but angry. "You took what was mine." Her eyes darted toward the trapdoor outside. The box. Whatever it had held, whatever had been bound inside it, was free now, and it wanted her. That night seemed endless. Every hour brought new sound scratches on the walls, whispers in the rafters, footsteps circling the cabin though no one was there. She kept the children close, too afraid to sleep. When dawn finally broke, she opened the door to find the ground around the cabin torn up, as though something had clawed its way across the earth. She knew she couldn't stay any longer. They packed what little they had, but when she stepped outside, the eldest child froze. "Ma," he said softly, pointing to the trees. "Someone's watching us." Between the pines stood the man again, his coat torn, his face pale as stone. Behind him, shapes moved, shadows that flickered in and out of sight, too many to count. He lifted his hand slowly, not in greeting, but in warning. "Don't go," he said. "It will follow." Her heart sank. "Then what do I do?" "Finish what I couldn't," he said. "Return what was stolen." She opened her mouth to ask how, but he was already gone, fading into the mist. The air around her seemed to hum, low and steady, vibrating through the ground. She felt the earth tremble beneath her feet and knew. The thing buried there was waking again, as the sun slipped behind the clouds. She led her children back inside, bolting the door. The air felt thick, heavy with the scent of smoke and wet soil. Her hands shook as she looked around the cabin, at the hearth where the hole gaped, at the rug she had used to hide it, at the walls that whispered with every breath of wind. The youngest began to cry softly, and she knelt to comfort him. "It's all right," she whispered, though her voice broke. "We'll be safe." But even as she said it, the floor trembled again. From beneath, a faint light began to glow, a soft, sickly gold that pulsed like a heartbeat. The boards creaked as though something below was pushing against them again. The widow stood slowly, clutching her knife. Her reflection flickered in the window, and for an instant, she thought she saw another face beside her, as one that wasn't alive. But watching her with hollow eyes, the wind roared outside, shaking the walls. The children clung to her, their small hands cold and trembling. She knew the moment she had feared was coming. Whatever was bound beneath this cabin was done waiting. It was rising, and it was coming for what was owed. And as the firelight dimmed, the whisper came one last time, closer now, almost at her ear. "You can't save them." The whisper froze her where she stood. It was so close she could feel its breath against her ear, though the air around her had turned cold as stone. Her pulse thundered in her chest as she looked down at her children, their eyes wide, trusting her to be stronger than the fear that filled the room. The glow from beneath the floor grew brighter, pulsing like the heartbeat of something alive, something ancient. Dust fell from the rafters as the cabin trembled. She knew running wouldn't save them. Whatever was beneath had already claimed this place. It already tied itself to her the moment she lifted that cursed box from the ground. The tracker's words echoed in her mind. You can only bargain with it. If there was any way to end this, it wasn't by fleeing. It was by giving it what it wanted. She moved slowly toward the hole in the floor, the knife still clutched tight in her hand. The children cried out for her, but she turned and gave them a look that silenced them. "Stay back," she whispered. "Don't come near." The air around the hole shimmered, thick and heavy. As she knelt beside it, she could see the faint outline of something moving below, shadows shifting in the golden light, like hands reaching toward her. "What do you want from me?" she said softly, her voice shaking. From the dark came the same low voice that had haunted her dreams. "What was stolen?" She swallowed hard. "What was stolen from you?" There was silence at first, and then images flooded her mind, visions of a battle long ago, of soldiers tearing through the woods, of gold and relics taken from sacred ground. Among them, the box. It wasn't a treasure. It was a seal meant to keep the spirit of the land contained. But when it was buried under the cabin, it became trap-bound to the greed of the men who had disturbed it. The man who'd come to her cabin had been one of them. He'd stolen the box, thinking it held gold, and the spirit had cursed him, tying his soul to it until the debt was repaid. The realization struck her like a storm. This wasn't just about the dead. It was about what the living had done. The land was angry, restless, demanding balance. And now it had turned to her, an Apache widow, descendant of those who once guarded it. She lowered the knife and closed her eyes. "If a life must be given, take mine," she whispered, "but leave the children." For a moment there was no sound. Then the whisper came again, softer now, almost mournful. "Not your life. Your promise." She opened her eyes, confused. What promise? To keep it. To guard it as they once did? To remember. The light beneath the floor began to fade. The air warmed slightly and the trembling eased. She felt the weight of something lift from her chest, though the sorrow of it pressed into her heart. The spirit didn't want blood. It wanted peace, to be remembered and honored again. She bowed her head, whispering an old prayer her grandmother once taught her, one meant for restless souls. The light dimmed further until it vanished completely. The cabin fell silent. Only the crackle of the dying fire remained. When she finally stood, her legs felt weak. The children rushed to her, clinging tightly to her dress. She held them close, tears slipping down her cheeks. Outside, the wind had stilled, and for the first time in many nights, the forest felt calm. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds, lighting the valley in gold. The earth no longer smelled of decay, and the air felt lighter. She stepped outside and saw that the ground near the trapdoor had closed over. The soil was smooth again, as if it had never been disturbed. The chain was gone. She spent the rest of the day cleaning the cabin, mending what was broken. It felt different now, not haunted, but humbled. The children played near the stream, laughing again, their voices echoing through the trees. When the eldest asked if the whispering would return, she smiled faintly and said, "Not if we remember what belongs to this land." Over the following weeks, the widow began to rebuild her life. She planted corn and beans, tended the small patch of earth behind the cabin, and taught her children the old songs her mother once sang to her. The nights grew quiet again, and the forest slowly came alive with birds and wind and the sound of water. But every so often, when she stood by the hearth, she felt a soft vibration beneath her feet, steady and calm, like a heart beating deep within the earth. Sometimes, when the moon was full, she'd hear the faint echo of a voice outside. It no longer frightened her. It felt like a guardian keeping watch, reminding her of the promise she had made. And though the cabin stood alone in the woods, it no longer felt abandoned. It was part of the land again, part of something older than her sorrow as the years passed. Travelers would sometimes find their way through the valley and speak of a woman who lived near the river with her children, kind and quiet, always tending the earth as though it were sacred. They said her crops never failed, that her garden grew even through dry seasons, and that no wild animal ever harmed her. Some whispered that the land itself protected her. When her children grew older, she told them the story not with fear, but with reverence. She spoke of the box and the spirit bound within it, of how the earth remembers what is taken from it. She told them that everything has a balance, and that forgetting the past is what brings the dead back restless. They listened, wide-eyed, their faces lit by the firelight, and promised to keep the story alive. Years later, when her eldest had children of his own, the cabin still stood. Weathered, but strong, it had become part of the forest. Travelers still avoided the area at night. But those who stayed said they sometimes heard a soft song coming from the woods, a woman's voice. Low and steady, carried on the wind. Some said it was the widow singing to her children. Others said it was the spirit of the land, finally at peace. But those who truly listened, who stood long enough in the quiet to feel the heartbeat of the earth, knew it was both in the end. The widow's story wasn't one of horror, but of remembering how the past can bury itself in silence, till someone dares to listen. The cabin remained her home until the end of her days, and when she was gone, her children buried her beneath the tall oak that grew near the stream, the same place she used to sit and watch the sunset. Each spring, the flowers bloomed first near her grave, bright and golden, like sunlight breaking through shadow. The land that had once cried out in anger now sang with life. The cabin, once a place of fear, became a home of stories, of laughter, roots deep enough to hold generations. No one ever found the box again. Maybe it returned to where it belonged, deep in the soil, where time forgets and forgiveness begins. Or maybe it was never meant to be found, only understood. And sometimes, when the wind sweeps softly through the valley, carrying the smell of pine and earth, it sounds almost like a whispered, grateful, at peace. The kind of whisper that doesn't haunt anymore, but reminds it was said that on nights when the stars shone brightest, you could see a faint glow from beneath the cabin, not fierce or frightening, but warm like the breath of the earth itself. A promise kept, a spirit resting, a memory that lived on through the quiet heart of the land. The widow had given her word, and the land had listened. That was all it ever wanted: to be remembered, to be respected, to be whole again. And in the stillness of that lonely valley, under the old wooden roof and the whispering trees, peace finally found its place.